South Africa faces a major economic challenge with the government proposing a controversial VAT hike, increasing it from 15 to 17%. This has sparked debate and uncertainty. People worry about the impact on their wallets, especially those already struggling. Imagine this, you're at the checkout counter. Suddenly everything costs more. That's the reality with this VAT increase. From coffee to school supplies, everything costs more. Many feel anxious and frustrated. This isn't just about numbers, it's about real people and their struggles. The government argues it's necessary. Critics say it hits the poor hardest. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. We'll explore the arguments for and against it, the potential impact on ordinary South Africans, and the government's plans to mitigate the negative effects. Buckle up, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. The proposed VAT hike has thrown a wrench into South Africa's budget plans. The annual budget speech, where the government outlines its spending priorities for the year, was postponed amidst heated debates about the VAT increase. This delay highlights the deep divisions within the government and the opposition's fierce resistance to the proposed tax hike. The Democratic Alliance, South Africa's main opposition party, has been particularly vocal in its criticism of the VAT hike. They argue that it's a lazy solution that will only burden ordinary South Africans while doing little to address the country's underlying economic problems. The DA has even claimed responsibility for the budget postponement, arguing that their pressure forced the government to reconsider its plans. However, the government insists that the postponement was a necessary step to allow for further consultations and to ensure a more inclusive budget process. They argue that the DA is simply trying to score political points and that their claims of responsibility are exaggerated. This back and forth between the government and the opposition reflects the high stakes involved in the VAT hike debate. It's not just about economic policy, it's about political power, public perception, and the future direction of South Africa. The budget delay has only added to the uncertainty and anxiety surrounding the VAT hike, leaving many South Africans wondering what the future holds. The South African government argues that the proposed VAT hike is necessary to address the country's economic situation. They claim the additional revenue is crucial to fund essential services and reduce the budget deficit. Critics argue the government should address wasteful spending and corruption first. Section 4. Softening the blow. Protecting the vulnerable. Recognizing that a VAT hike would hit the poor and vulnerable the hardest, the government has proposed a series of measures to mitigate the impact on low-income households. These include above-inflation increases to social grants, an extension of fuel levy relief, and an expansion of the list of zero-rated essential food items. Social grants, which provide a vital safety net for millions of South Africans living in poverty, are set to increase by more than the inflation rate. This means that the purchasing power of these grants will be protected, ensuring that recipients can still afford basic necessities despite the VAT hike. The fuel levy relief, which was introduced to cushion consumers from soaring fuel prices, will also be extended. This will provide some respite for motorists who are already grappling with the rising cost of living. Additionally, the government plans to expand the list of zero-rated essential food items to include more affordable and nutritious options. This will make it slightly easier for low-income households to put food on the table, despite the overall increase in prices. While these mitigation measures are welcome, critics argue that they are insufficient to offset the full impact of the VAT hike on the poor. They argue that a more comprehensive approach is needed, one that addresses the root causes of poverty and inequality in South Africa. Section 5. Where will the money go? The government's spending plan. The South African government has outlined its spending priorities for the additional revenue generated from the VAT hike, emphasizing investments in key areas such as healthcare, education, social development, and infrastructure. They argue that these investments are essential to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and improve the lives of all South Africans. A significant portion of the revenue will be allocated to the social wage, which encompasses essential services like healthcare, education, social protection, and community development. This investment aims to improve access to quality public services, particularly for the poor and marginalized communities. The government has also pledged to invest in frontline services such as education, healthcare, early childhood development, and commuter rail. This includes upgrading existing infrastructure, building new facilities and hiring more teachers, doctors, and nurses. Furthermore, the government plans to allocate funds for infrastructure development, including roads, bridges, energy, and water projects. These investments are intended to improve connectivity, boost economic activity, and create jobs. While the government's spending plan appears comprehensive and well-intentioned, critics argue that it lacks detail and concrete timelines. They also express concerns about the government's track record on service delivery, citing past instances of corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiency. Section 6. A chorus of dissent. Opposition to the VAT hike. The proposed VAT hike has been met with fierce opposition from various quarters, including opposition political parties, trade unions, civil society organizations, and ordinary South Africans. Critics argue that the VAT hike is a regressive tax that will disproportionately burden the poor and working class, exacerbate inequality, and stifle economic growth. Opposition parties such as the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters have condemned the VAT hike, calling it a desperate and ill-conceived measure that will push more South Africans into poverty. They argue that the government should instead focus on cutting wasteful spending, tackling corruption, and implementing pro-growth economic policies. Trade unions such as the Congress of South African Trade Unions and the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa have also voiced their strong opposition to the VAT hike, arguing that it will erode the purchasing power of workers and lead to job losses. They have threatened to embark on nationwide strikes and protests if the government proceeds with the VAT increase. Civil society organizations have joined the chorus of dissent, arguing that the VAT hike will have a devastating impact on the poor and vulnerable, who are already struggling to make ends meet. They have called on the government to explore alternative revenue-generating measures that do not place an undue burden on ordinary citizens. Section 7. A tough call, weighing the pros and cons. The proposed VAT hike in South Africa presents a complex dilemma, with compelling arguments both for and against it. On the one hand, the government faces a genuine fiscal crisis, with limited options to raise the revenue needed to fund essential services, reduce debt, and stimulate economic growth. The VAT hike, while unpopular, offers a relatively efficient and broad-based way to generate significant revenue. On the other hand, critics argue that the VAT hike is a blunt instrument that will disproportionately impact the poor and working class, exacerbate inequality, and potentially stifle economic growth by reducing consumer spending. They argue that the government should prioritize cutting wasteful spending, tackling corruption, and implementing pro-growth economic policies before resorting to tax hikes that will burden ordinary citizens. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to implement the VAT hike is a difficult one, with no easy answers. The government must carefully weigh the potential benefits of increased revenue against the potential costs of increased hardship for its citizens. Finding the right balance between fiscal responsibility and social equity is crucial. The government needs to engage in meaningful dialogue with all stakeholders, including opposition parties, trade unions, civil society organizations, and ordinary South Africans, to find a solution that addresses the country's fiscal challenges while protecting the most vulnerable.